Writer, the Internet Typewriter. Ancestral Resonance. Ancestral Resonance I. The Binding 2791 BCE. Lysandra's fingers hovered over the brass bowl, blood dripping from her palm in careful, measured drops. 7 drops, no more, no less. The liquid sizzled as it struck the mixture of powdered silverwood bark, crushed amber, and the crystalline dust of stars fallen to earth. The workshop filled with a subtle fragrance, not the acrid smell of burning herbs and minerals she expected, but something deeper, almost like rain on sun-warmed stone. "By my blood," she whispered, her voice barely audible even in the silence of her sanctuary. "By my breath, by the knowledge carried in my mind and the power flowing through my veins." Outside, beyond the stone walls of her workshop nestled in the foothills of Mount Adris, the once mighty city of Illyrium had fallen silent. Most had fled weeks ago, when the first warships of the Eastern Empire appeared on the horizon. Only the desperate, the stubborn, and those with secrets to protect remained. Lysandra touched the sigil tattooed behind her ear, her final connection to her mentor, Theron, dead these past 3 summers. The pattern tingled under her fingertips, resonating with the mixture before her. "Is this madness, old friend?" she asked the empty room. "To trust the future with what we could not protect in the present?" The Illyrian Codex, the accumulated wisdom of 12 generations of mystics and alchemists, lay open beside her. Unlike the Eastern Empire with their rigid hierarchies and jealously guarded secrets, the Illyrian tradition had always valued the open exchange of knowledge. Their magic was not about dominance or spectacle, but understanding, a delicate, intricate dance with the underlying patterns of existence. And now it would die with their civilization, unless her desperate gambit succeeded. 3 years she had labored, developing a process unlike any attempted before, not the crude soul binding that the Eastern mystics practiced, tethering spirits to objects or unwilling hosts, not the desperate necromancy that had tempted many of her colleagues as destruction loomed. Something far more subtle, a transcription of essence, a binding of knowledge and consciousness to her own bloodline, dormant until the conditions were right for its awakening. An inheritance carried through generations, waiting for the one who could bear it. Lysandra lifted the small silver knife again, this time drawing it across her scalp, severing a lock of her distinctive hair, black streaked with silver though she had seen only 30 summers. She had long suspected the silver was a physical manifestation of her connection to the veil, that liminal space between the material and the immaterial that only those with the gift could perceive. The hair joined the mixture, dissolving with surprising swiftness. Next came 7 drops of essence distilled from the rare night-blooming orchids that grew only in the sacred groves of Illyrium, followed by ink made from the blue stones found in the deepest mines beneath the city. "From my mind to yours," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "From my time to yours, not to control, but to preserve, not to command, but to guide." The brass bowl began to hum with a barely perceptible vibration. The air in the workshop grew heavy, as if the boundary between worlds had thinned. Lysandra felt the familiar pressure behind her eyes that signaled the veil's proximity. She had one final ingredient to add. From a small wooden box, she removed a crystal vial containing a swirling silver mist, her distilled memories and knowledge, extracted through a painful process of meditation and blood magic over many months. Not all her memories, for that would be too much for any descendant to bear, but carefully selected fragments, the foundational principles of Illyrian alchemy, the symbolic language that allowed manipulation of the world's underlying energies, and her own discoveries about the persistent patterns that echoed through time and consciousness. She uncorked the vial with trembling fingers. "To you, my unknown child of distant times," she whispered. "May you be wiser than I, may you succeed where we have failed." As the silver mist joined the mixture, the workshop disappeared from Lysandra's perception. She found herself floating in a vast darkness punctuated by threads of light stretching into infinity. The veil had parted completely, showing her the branching possibilities of her bloodline extending forward through countless generations, some threads thin and fading, others pulsing with vitality. With her mind, she reached out, following the brightest threads forward, seeking the resonance that would indicate receptivity to her gift. Most magical talent manifested in youth, but her process required something different, a mature mind capable of integrating complex knowledge, yet still flexible enough to accept radical new perceptions. She touched thread after thread, sampling the essence of descendants yet unborn, until, there, a distant node of brightness, thousands of years removed, a mind with the perfect balance of skepticism and openness, analytical thinking and intuitive understanding. Lysandra directed the full force of her consciousness toward this distant descendant, focusing the accumulated power of her ritual. The darkness around her flared with sudden brilliance as the connection was made. For a single transcendent moment, she perceived her descendant clearly, a woman with eyes remarkably like her own, standing in a place filled with strange objects and unfamiliar light, her hands pressed to her temples in sudden disorientation. Remember, Lysandra projected into the vast gulf between them. When the time comes, remember and continue what I have begun. The cycle must be completed. Then the vision shattered, and Lysandra collapsed beside her worktable, the brass bowl now empty save for a fine gray ash. The ritual had succeeded, but the cost was greater than she had anticipated. She could feel the absence of what she had given away, not just knowledge and memories, but something more fundamental. A piece of her selfhood had traveled along the silver threads of time. Outside, the warning bells began to ring. The eastern ships had been sighted in the harbor. With the last of her strength, Lysandra pulled herself to her feet. She had done what she could for the future. Now she would face the present, and whatever brief time remained to her. 2. The awakening present day. Dr. Eleanor Vance paused outside the lecture hall, adjusting her glasses and taking a deep breath. 24 graduate students waited inside for her seminar on symbolic systems in ancient Mediterranean cultures. At 34, she was among the youngest tenured professors in Columbia University's anthropology department, with a reputation for innovative but controversial theories about knowledge transmission in pre-classical civilizations. The headache that had been building all morning suddenly intensified, a spike of pain behind her right eye. Eleanor pressed her fingers to her temple, wincing. These migraines had become increasingly common over the past year, often accompanied by strange dreams and moments of disorientation. Remember? The voice whispered through her mind, as it had countless times in recent months, a woman's voice, accented in a way Eleanor couldn't place. She'd dismissed it as stress-induced auditory hallucination, though she'd never experienced anything similar during her previous academic crises. Straightening her posture, Eleanor pushed through the door and approached the podium. She connected her laptop to the projector, and her most recent discovery filled the screen, a fragment of an unknown script found on pottery shards at an archaeological site in northern Greece. The script resembled no known ancient language, composed of flowing symbols that seemed to twist and connect in mathematically precise patterns. "Good morning," she began. "Today we're continuing our examination of non-linguistic symbolic systems. Last week, we discussed how certain mathematical patterns appear across isolated cultures. This fragment," Eleanor faltered as her vision blurred. The symbols on the screen seemed to rearrange themselves, shifting into new configurations that suddenly made perfect sense to her. She could read them as clearly as English, though she knew that should be impossible. Through the binding of essence to blood, consciousness may transcend its temporal constraints. Dr. Vance, one of her students, was looking at her with concern. "Are you all right?" Eleanor blinked, and the symbols returned to their original configuration. "Yes, sorry. Just a moment out. Let me get some water." She fumbled with her water bottle, buying time as her heart raced. This wasn't the first time she'd experienced such a moment of impossible clarity. 2 months ago, while examining a millennia-old alchemical text, she'd suddenly understood a process described there and had reproduced it in her kitchen that night, creating a compound that seemingly defied chemical analysis. There was no logical explanation for how she had known which modern substances corresponded to the ancient ingredients, nor for the strange silver-bluish liquid that had resulted, a liquid she'd hidden in her apartment, afraid to show anyone lest they question her methodology or, worse, her sanity. As I was saying, Eleanor continued, her professional mask firmly back in place, this fragment contains symbolic patterns that appear to describe processes rather than objects or concepts. They bear a striking resemblance to notations found at sites nearly 500 miles away, despite no evidence of direct cultural contact. She advanced to the next slide, showing similar symbols from multiple archaeological sites. My hypothesis is that these represent a shared understanding of natural processes, perhaps a proto-scientific notation system that transcended linguistic barriers. What she didn't say was what she increasingly believed, that these symbols weren't merely descriptive but operational, tools for manipulating energies that modern science had yet to properly categorize. The lecture proceeded without further incident, though the headache remained, pulsing behind her eyes like a second heartbeat. When the students had filed out, Eleanor sank into a chair, rubbing her temples. Her phone chimed with a text message from her department chair, committee meeting cancelled. Found something in the new acquisition you should see. My office, 3 p.m. Eleanor checked her watch. That gave her 2 hours, enough time to return to her apartment and take migraine medication. As she packed her materials, her fingers brushed against the small leather-bound journal she'd been keeping for the past 6 months, documenting her strange experiences, dreams, and inexplicable moments of knowledge. In her small Upper West Side apartment, Eleanor swallowed 2 pills with a glass of water and lay down on her bed, hoping for a few minutes of relief before meeting with her department chair. She closed her eyes, and immediately the symbols from the pottery fragment reappeared in her mind, shifting and flowing. Sleep overtook her with unexpected swiftness. She dreamed of a stone room filled with unfamiliar instruments, a woman with silver-streaked black hair working by lamplight. The woman looked up, and Eleanor gasped at the eyes. They were her own eyes, looking back at her from an ancient face. You begin to hear me now, the woman said in a language Eleanor had never studied yet somehow understood. The time comes soon. The pattern nears completion. Who are you? Eleanor asked. I am Lysandra of Illyrium, last keeper of the Codex. And you are my daughter, across the gulf of time. This isn't real, Eleanor said, though without conviction. Reality is more permeable than your age believes. Lysandra approached, studying Eleanor with intense focus. You have the gift strongly in you. The patterns I embedded in our bloodline have found fertile ground. She gestured, and the air between them filled with the same symbols Eleanor had been studying, but moving, interacting, forming complex three-dimensional structures. These are not merely symbols, but keys, tools to manipulate the underlying energies that flow through all things. What you call magic is simply science your culture has forgotten. Why me? Eleanor asked. Why now? Lysandra's expression grew grave. Because what was sundered must be reunited. Because what sleeps shall soon awaken. I preserved what I could, but it was never meant to end with you. The dream shifted. They stood on a high tower overlooking a sprawling city unlike any Eleanor had seen, buildings of impossible height and design, lights that shone without flame, vehicles that moved without horses. And it shall not end with you, Lysandra continued. The third must complete what was begun. The binding must continue. She pointed to a figure in the distance, indistinct but somehow familiar. Your descendant, the one who will face what comes, the one who must carry both your knowledge and mine. Eleanor felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of purpose and dread. What do I need to do? Remember, Lysandra said, touching Eleanor's forehead. The knowledge is already within you. The process will reveal itself when you are ready to see. Eleanor woke with a start, her migraine gone. She sat up, reaching immediately for her journal. But instead of recording the dream, her hand moved of its own accord, sketching symbols and diagrams she shouldn't have known. The process Lysandra had spoken of, the method of continuing the imprinting. When she finished, Eleanor stared at the pages in shock. What she had drawn was impossible, a process combining ancient alchemical principles with modern genetics and neuroscience, describing how consciousness could be partially encoded and transmitted through carefully prepared biological markers. Her alarm chimed. It was time to meet her department chair. "This arrived last week with the Severian collection," Professor Martin said, carefully laying a small wooden box on his desk. "No provenance information, but carbon dating puts it around 2800 BCE. Given your research focus, I thought you should have first look." Eleanor approached cautiously. The box was simple, unadorned except for a series of small inlaid symbols along the edge, symbols identical to those from the pottery fragments she'd been studying. "May I?" she asked, reaching for it. As her fingers touched the wood, a jolt of recognition shot through her. She knew this box. Had seen it in her dream, sitting on Lysandra's worktable. With trembling hands, she opened the lid. Inside lay a small crystal vial containing what appeared to be clear water, and a circular bronze amulet inscribed with concentric rings of symbols. "Fascinating craftsmanship," Professor Martin commented. "The linguistics department is baffled by the script. I thought perhaps with your comparative approach." "I'll need to study it carefully," Eleanor interrupted, unable to tear her eyes from the vial. "May I take it to my lab?" Professor Martin hesitated. "Technically, it should remain in the secure collection, but, given your standing in the department, I could sign it out to you for 48 hours. "That would be perfect," she said, already knowing that the box would never return to the university's collection. That night, Eleanor sat cross-legged on her living room floor, the box open before her, surrounded by candles, not for atmosphere, but arranged in a precise pattern she had drawn in her journal upon waking. The amulet hung around her neck, surprisingly warm against her skin. She had spent hours transcribing the symbols from her dream, cross-referencing them with her academic research, and finding alarming correlations. Historical sites she had studied contained fragments of the same symbolic language. Ancient texts she had analyzed held pieces of the process Lysandra had begun. All her academic career, she had been unconsciously drawn to the breadcrumbs her ancestor had scattered across history. "I don't believe in magic," Eleanor said aloud to her empty apartment. "But I believe in evidence, and the evidence suggests something extraordinary." She uncorked the vial, expecting to find it empty after thousands of years. Instead, a faint silver mist rose from it, hanging in the air before her. As she watched, it seemed to recognize her, coiling toward her like a curious animal. "Remember," the voice whispered more clearly than ever. And suddenly, she did. Memories that were not her own flooded Eleanor's consciousness. Lysandra walking through the marketplaces of a city that had been dust for millennia, practicing complex rituals in hidden groves, weeping over ancient books as enemy ships appeared on the horizon. Along with the memories came knowledge, the principles of Illyrian alchemy, the symbolic language that allowed perception and manipulation of energies modern science had no names for, the careful art of consciousness preservation. Eleanor gasped, overwhelmed by the influx. When her vision cleared, she looked down at her hands to find them tracing symbols in the air, leaving faint luminous trails that slowly faded. "This is real," she whispered. "All of it." The implications staggered her, not just for her understanding of history, but for her future. Lysandra's imprinting hadn't been meant merely to preserve knowledge, but to continue a chain, to prepare for something her ancestor had foreseen. Eleanor reached for her journal, writing rapidly as understanding crystallized. The imprinting isn't just a transmission of knowledge, it's cumulative. Each recipient adds their own understanding before passing it on. Lysandra began the process, but I meant to continue it, adding my modern perspective and knowledge before imprinting it on my own descendant. But why? What is coming that requires this multi-generational preparation? She turned the page and found herself drawing another symbol, one she had seen repeated in ancient sites across 3 continents. A symbol that archaeologists had variously interpreted as representing a deity, a celestial event, or a natural disaster. In Lysandra's memories, it had a different meaning entirely. It represented the convergence, a rare alignment of physical and metaphysical conditions that allowed contact between dimensions normally separated by impermeable barriers. The last convergence had occurred just before the fall of Illyrium. The next, according to calculations Eleanor could suddenly perform with inexplicable certainty, would occur roughly 130 years in the future. Whatever had come through during the last convergence had been contained, but not defeated. It would return, and someone with both ancient knowledge and future technology would need to be prepared. Eleanor's hands shook as she reached for her laptop, opening a browser and searching for fertility clinics. The immediate next step was clear. She would need a daughter. 3. The Inheritance 2152 CE. Kellen Vance adjusted the sensitivity of his neural interface, wincing as the laboratory lights suddenly appeared too bright. At 32, he was Neurosynth Corporation's youngest senior research lead, heading the development of third-generation bio-integrative neural mesh technology. His current prototype, a network of quantum-sensitive nanofilaments designed to interface seamlessly with the human nervous system, represented a potential breakthrough in human-computer integration. If he could get it to stop causing migraines. Calibration's still off, he mumbled, making notes in his development log. Subject experiencing photosensitivity and mild pain response at integration sites. You really should stop using yourself as the primary test subject, said Dr. Eliza Chen from across the lab, not looking up from her workstation. The ethics committee's going to shut us down if they find out. Official testing starts next month, Kellen replied, massaging his temple where the interface connected. I need to resolve the sensitivity issues before then. He didn't mention his other reason for self-testing, the strange dreams he'd been having since the first prototype installation 3 months ago. Dreams of symbols and rituals, of a woman with silver-streaked hair showing him impossible things, and another woman, younger, with intense eyes, speaking urgently about a legacy and a responsibility. The dreams felt more like memories than fantasy, accompanied by an unsettling sense of familiarity. Twice now, he'd woken to find himself drawing intricate patterns he didn't consciously recognize, yet could reproduce with perfect precision. His terminal chimed with an incoming message. Director Sato wanted a progress update by end of day. Kellen sighed and stood, intending to get coffee before tackling the report, when a wave of dizziness struck him. He grabbed the edge of his workstation, knocking over a small wooden box he kept as a paperweight. The box, a family heirloom his mother had given him before her death 10 years ago, hit the floor and split along a previously invisible seam, revealing a hidden compartment. A small crystal vial rolled across the laboratory floor. "What's that?" Eliza asked, looking up at the noise. Kellen retrieved the vial, holding it up to the light. It contained what appeared to be clear water with a faint silvery sheen. "No idea," he said. "It was hidden in this box my mother gave me. Family heirloom, supposedly ancient." He examined the box more carefully now, noticing for the first time fine lines of inlaid symbols along the inner edge of the compartment, symbols that sent a shock of recognition through him, though he couldn't possibly have seen them before. "Interesting craftsmanship," Eliza said, coming closer. "Mind if I take a look?" Something made Kellen hesitate. "Maybe later. I should get this report done first." Eliza gave him an odd look but returned to her workstation. Kellen pocketed the vial and box, unable to explain the sudden protectiveness he felt toward them. That night in his apartment, Kellen dreamed more vividly than ever before. Two women stood before him, one ancient, one modern, but with the same penetrating gaze. "He begins to awaken," the older one said. "The neural mesh acts as a conduit," the younger replied. "Just as you predicted." "Who are you?" Kellen asked. "Why do I know your faces?" "I am Lysandra of Illyrium," the older woman said. "This is Eleanor Vance. I am your ancestress from the deep past. She is your more recent foremother." "We have been waiting for you," Eleanor said. "For generations." Lysandra approached, studying him with unnerving intensity. "The technologies you develop echo the principles we once manipulated through different means. The patterns are the same, though the methods differ." "This isn't real," Kellen said. "Neural feedback from the interface prototype. Stress-induced hallucination." Eleanor smiled. "That's almost exactly what I said when Lysandra first came to me. But you already know better, don't you? You've felt the resonance. You've drawn the symbols." "What do you want from me?" he asked. "Not what we want," Lysandra corrected. "What is necessary. The convergence approaches. The barriers between dimensions thin. What was contained before seeks release." The dream shifted, and Kellen found himself standing in a vast chamber filled with swirling energies. In the center floated a complex geometric structure composed of light and darkness, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed almost alive. "This is what came through during the last convergence," Eleanor explained. "A consciousness from beyond our normal dimensional boundaries. Not malevolent, but fundamentally incompatible with our reality in its pure form. The ancient Illyrians contained it through their metaphysical silence." "But the containment weakens," Lysandra continued. "And in your time, the convergence will allow its full emergence unless someone exists who can communicate with it, someone with the ancient knowledge and modern technological understanding to create a new interface between realities." "That's why we prepared you," Eleanor said. "I continued what Lysandra began, adding my understanding of linguistics and anthropology to her metaphysical knowledge, then imprinting it within our bloodline to awaken in you when needed." "How?" Kellen asked. "How could you possibly transfer knowledge through generations?" "The vial," Lysandra said. "What you discovered today is the physical component of the transfer. The metaphysical component has been within you since birth, dormant until the proper conditions emerged." "Your neural interface," Eleanor added. "It resonates with the patterns we established. The bioelectric pathways you've created mirror the energetic channels Lysandra taught me to perceive. Your technology and our magic, they're different expressions of the same underlying principles." Kellen woke abruptly, his heart racing. The neural interface at his temple pulsed with soft light, a technical impossibility, as it contained no illumination components. On his nightstand sat the crystal vial, which he didn't remember placing there. It glowed faintly in the darkness, the silvery substance inside now actively swirling. With trembling hands, he reached for it, knowing exactly what he needed to do, though he couldn't have explained how he knew. "This is insane," he muttered, uncorking the vial. The silvery substance emerged, not as a liquid but as a fine mist that coiled in the air before him. It moved with apparent intelligence, studying him before suddenly rushing forward, entering through his eyes, his nose, the neural interface at his temple. Kellen gasped as knowledge flooded his consciousness, not just information, but experiences, perspectives, ways of understanding reality that transcended conventional science. He perceived the underlying energetic patterns of his apartment, saw how they connected to larger flows throughout the city, the planet, the cosmos itself. Most importantly, he understood the nature of the convergence and what waited beyond it. Not a malevolent entity seeking destruction, but a vast intelligence operating on principles so foreign to human understanding that its unfiltered presence in our dimension would cause catastrophic disruption simply by existing. When the influx subsided, Kellen sat in stunned silence, integrating 3 lifetimes of knowledge. Lysandra's metaphysical understanding, Eleanor's linguistic and anthropological insights, and his own technological expertise, together forming a comprehensive framework for understanding and addressing the coming convergence. His neural interface no longer caused discomfort. Instead, it felt like an extension of himself, a natural conduit for the energies he could now perceive. When he raised his hand, faint patterns of light traced his movements, responding to his newfound awareness. "Not magic," he whispered. "Just science we forgot." The next morning, Kellen arrived at the laboratory with new purpose. He connected his neural interface to the main research terminal and began modifying the core algorithms, implementing principles derived from Illyrian symbolic language that would allow the technology to detect and interact with energy patterns beyond conventional scientific measurement. "What are you working on?" Eliza asked, noticing his intense focus and the unusual code flowing across his screen. "A significant upgrade," he replied without looking up. "I had some insights overnight." His fingers moved across the interface with preternatural speed and precision, implementing changes that would have taken a normal research team months to develop. By midday, he had created a functioning prototype of what he mentally termed a dimensional resonance detector, a modification to his neural mesh that could sense the subtle fluctuations indicating thinning between dimensional boundaries. At his terminal, the simulation showed the expected energy signature of the convergence based on historical data from Lysandra's time and Eleanor's calculations. According to their combined knowledge, the event would begin in approximately 16 months, building gradually toward a peak that would allow full manifestation of the extra-dimensional consciousness. "Kellen," Director Sato's voice broke his concentration. She stood in the laboratory doorway, a concerned expression on her face. "Dr. Chen tells me you've been making unauthorized modifications to the interface prototype." "Not unauthorized," he replied, continuing his work. "Just accelerated. I've had a breakthrough." "I'd like to see your documentation and testing protocols," she said, approaching his workstation. "And the ethics committee needs to review any significant changes before." She stopped, staring at his screen. "What is this? These algorithms aren't in our research framework." Kellen considered his options. He could try to explain, tell his supervisor that he'd received knowledge from his ancestors across millennia, that he was preparing for a metaphysical event that would tear the barriers between dimensions. He'd be removed from the project immediately, probably referred for psychiatric evaluation. "It's a personal exploration," he said instead. "A theoretical extension of our current work. I'm not implementing it in the official prototype." Director Sato frowned. "I need you focused on deliverables, not theoretical explorations. The board expects results this quarter." "You'll have them," Kellen promised. "The core interface is nearly ready for clinical trials. This is just a side project." She seemed unconvinced but nodded. "I want the standard prototype documentation on my desk by tomorrow morning." After she left, Eliza approached his workstation. "What are you really working on? I've never seen code structures like that." Kellen hesitated. Eliza had been his research partner for 3 years, brilliant, pragmatic, and uncommonly open-minded. If anyone might understand, or at least not immediately dismiss him as delusional, it would be her. "If I told you there are energetic patterns underlying physical reality that our current scientific instruments can't detect," he said carefully, "but that my neural interface modifications could potentially perceive and interact with, what would you say?" Eliza studied him for a long moment. "I'd say that sounds like the kind of fringe theory that gets promising scientists laughed out of academia." "But you're not laughing." "No," she admitted. "Because your coding is too structured, too precise to be random exploration. And because my grandmother used to talk about ancient knowledge lost to modern science, patterns in nature that traditional wisdom could perceive but instruments couldn't measure." She pulled up a chair beside him. "Show me what you're really doing." Over the next 12 months, Kellen and Eliza worked in secret, developing what they officially termed expanded spectrum sensitivity for the neural interface. To the corporation, they presented it as an experimental feature allowing users to perceive electromagnetic frequencies outside normal human range, a valuable enough advancement to secure continued funding while concealing its true purpose. Privately, they refined the interface's ability to detect and interpret the energetic patterns that Lysandra had manipulated through ritual and Eleanor had partially perceived through meditation. Kellen's technological approach achieved the same results through different means, creating a digital metaphysical hybrid that bridged millennia of separated knowledge. As the convergence approached, Kellen began detecting faint disruptions in the local dimensional boundary, subtle at first, but growing stronger each week. Using Eleanor's calculations, he identified the focal point, an abandoned industrial zone on the city's outskirts that had once been, according to archaeological records Eliza uncovered, the site of an ancient settlement. The patterns aligned too perfectly to be coincidence, Eliza said as they reviewed their findings in Kellen's apartment, away from corporate surveillance. Something about that location naturally facilitates dimensional thinning. Lysandra's people built there intentionally, Kellen replied, drawing on inherited memories. They could sense the natural energy flows. Their rituals were designed to work with existing patterns, not force new ones. On his apartment wall, a projected map showed pulsing energy signatures converging on the focal point. His neural interface, now permanently integrated and significantly evolved from the corporate prototype, constantly monitored the dimensional fluctuations. 3 weeks until peak convergence, he noted. We need to finalize the communication protocol. What Lysandra's people had achieved through complex ritual and Eleanor had theorized through linguistic analysis, Kellen and Eliza developed as a technological interface, a system that could translate the fundamental patterns of human consciousness into forms comprehensible to the extra-dimensional entity, and vice versa. Are we really doing this? Eliza asked, the reality of their situation finally seeming to hit her. Preparing to communicate with an entity from another dimension based on knowledge supposedly passed down through your bloodline. Kellen smiled. Having doubts? Constantly, she admitted. But then I look at the data, at the energy readings that shouldn't exist according to conventional physics, and I can't deny the evidence. She gestured to the interface components spread across his living room. Besides, even if we're wrong about the cause, the technology we've developed is revolutionary. Neural interfaces that can detect and interact with previously unmeasurable energy patterns. That alone changes everything. We're not wrong, Kellen said quietly. And this is just the beginning. He touched the neural filaments at his temple, activating the deeper connections that allowed him to perceive the symbolic language underlying reality. The room filled with faint luminous patterns visible only to him, the energetic blueprint of physical objects, the subtle connections between seemingly separate things. Drawing on Lysandra's knowledge, filtered through Eleanor's understanding and enhanced by his own technological innovations, he began the final preparations for the convergence. The abandoned factory loomed against the night sky, its broken windows and crumbling walls silhouetted by the city lights in the distance. According to Kellen's sensors, the dimensional boundary here had thinned to critical levels, creating a space where realities overlapped. He and Eliza had arrived an hour before midnight, setting up their equipment in what had once been the main production floor. The enhanced neural interface Kellen wore connected to a larger system they had built, an array of quantum processors and custom-designed field generators that would amplify and focus the communication signals. Energy fluctuations increasing, Eliza reported, monitoring the readings from their instruments. Dimensional variance at 67% and rising. Kellen nodded, centering himself as he'd learned from Eleanor's memories. The interface at his temple pulsed with soft light, synchronizing with his heartbeat. Around them, the air seemed to thicken, taking on a subtle luminosity visible even to normal perception. This is really happening, Eliza whispered, her scientific skepticism finally giving way to awe. As midnight approached, Kellen activated the full capabilities of his neural interface. The factory floor disappeared from his perception, replaced by a vast, swirling cosmos of energetic patterns, what Lysandra had called the veil, the liminal space between dimensions where the underlying structure of reality became visible. In this state, he could perceive the approaching entity, not as a physical form, but as a complex, evolving pattern of consciousness expanding from beyond the dimensional boundary. It was ancient beyond human comprehension, its awareness distributed across multiple realities in ways that defied conventional understanding. Contact in 30 seconds, Eliza's voice came to him distantly, as if from across a great divide. Kellen extended his perception along the patterns Lysandra had mapped millennia ago, following the silver threads that connected all consciousness. When he touched the entity's awareness, he expected resistance or incomprehension. Instead, he felt immediate recognition. "You carry the pattern of the binder," the entity communicated, not in words but in directly transmitted concepts. "The one who contained but did not destroy." "I carry her knowledge," Kellen replied in the same conceptual language, "and that of those who came after." Images flowed between them, Lysandra performing the ritual that had partially contained the entity during the last convergence, Eleanor discovering and continuing the pattern, Kellen completing the circle with his technological understanding. "Why have you come to our reality?" Kellen asked. The entity's response came as a complex tapestry of concepts and emotions. It had not come in any deliberate sense, rather, the natural cycle of dimensional thinning had allowed its consciousness to partially manifest. Its presence was no more intentional than water flowing downhill, simply following the path of least resistance between realities. But its unfiltered presence in human reality caused disruption, what Lysandra's people had experienced as devastating natural disasters and inexplicable phenomena. Not malevolence, but incompatibility. "I understand now," Kellen communicated. "You need an interface." He activated the system he and Eliza had built, using the neural "I understand now," Kellen communicated. "You need an interface." He activated the system he and Eliza had built, using the neural interface as a bridge between technological and metaphysical principles. The quantum processors hummed to life, generating fields that synchronized with both human brainwave patterns and the entity's dimensional frequency. "We offer a connection," Kellen projected, "a means of translation between your reality and ours." The entity's consciousness expanded, exploring the offered interface with cautious curiosity. Through their connection, Kellen sensed its ancient awareness, not hostile, but utterly alien, perceiving existence through frameworks no human mind could naturally comprehend. In the physical world, Eliza watched as the air around Kellen shimmered with coruscating patterns of light. The readings on her monitors spiked, energy signatures multiplying beyond the instrument's capacity to display them. "It's working," she whispered, though there was no one to hear. Within the veil, Kellen guided the entity's consciousness toward the interface, drawing on Lysandra's understanding of energy patterns and Eleanor's insights into symbolic communication. The technology he had developed served as a framework, but the actual connection required the inherited knowledge that flowed through his bloodline. "This will allow communication without disruption," he explained. "A shared space where our realities can interact without damaging each other." The entity's response came as a complex tapestry of emotion and understanding, gratitude mingled with something like relief. Through the deepening connection, Kellen glimpsed the entity's experience during the previous convergence, confusion at finding itself partially manifested in an incompatible reality, unintentional destruction as its mere presence warped the physical laws around it, and then the containment, not painful, but limiting, like being perpetually half awake. "Lysandra didn't understand what you were," Kellen realized. "She thought you were attempting to invade." The binder acted from knowledge incomplete, the entity acknowledged, but her pattern preserved both realities from greater harm. As the interface stabilized, Kellen perceived more of the entity's true nature. It existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously, its consciousness distributed in ways human minds couldn't comprehend. What manifested during convergences was merely the smallest fraction of its being, like a finger dipping into water, creating ripples throughout the pool. "What do you seek from our reality?" Kellen asked. The answer flooded his mind with startling clarity. "Exchange. Evolution. The patterns of your consciousness differ from ours. In difference lies growth." The entity didn't want conquest or control. It sought the novel patterns of thought that emerged from human consciousness, patterns that couldn't evolve in its native dimensional framework. And it offered something in return, perspectives and understanding from beyond human perception. In that moment of connection, Kellen glimpsed possibilities beyond anything he had imagined, advances in energy manipulation, consciousness transfer, even the fundamental restructuring of matter, knowledge that could transform human civilization, if properly translated and gradually introduced. The interface began to pulse with increased energy as the convergence reached its peak. Through their connection, the entity communicated urgency. The thinning reaches its apex. Decision required. Kellen understood the choice before him. He could follow Lysandra's original path, containing the entity, limiting its influence, but also its potential benefits. Or he could complete the interface, establishing a permanent connection that would allow controlled communication between realities. He reached out through the neural mesh, connecting to Eliza's consciousness. "I need your perspective." In an instant, she joined him in the liminal space, her scientific mind quickly processing the extraordinary situation. "This goes beyond anything we anticipated," she projected, her thoughts tinged with awe and caution. "The potential benefits are enormous, but so are the risks." "The interface can regulate the flow," Kellen responded. "Limit exchanges to what both sides can safely integrate." Together, they analyzed the patterns, drawing on 3 lifetimes of accumulated knowledge and their own scientific understanding. The solution emerged, not containment, but controlled symbiosis. A permanent interface that would allow beneficial exchange while preventing the dimensional disruption that had threatened Lysandra's civilization. "We offer connection within boundaries," Kellen communicated to the entity. "A bridge between our realities that honors the integrity of both." The entity's response came as a surge of affirmation, rippling through the interface with harmonious resonance. As the convergence reached its peak, the dimensional boundaries between human reality and the entity's domain thinned to their minimum, not vanishing, but becoming permeable enough for the interface to establish permanent anchoring points in both realities. In the abandoned factory, the air filled with luminous patterns visible even to normal human perception, the neural interface at Kellen's temple pulsed with brilliant energy that flowed through the technological array he and Eliza had constructed, creating a stable matrix for ongoing communication. As the convergence began to wane, the entity's direct presence gradually receded, but the interface remained, a permanent connection between dimensions, maintained by the synthesis of ancient knowledge and future technology. Kellen returned to normal consciousness to find Eliza staring at him with wide eyes. "Did we just establish diplomatic relations with a higher dimensional being?" she asked, her voice unsteady. "Something like that," he replied, his mind still processing the enormity of what had occurred. The neural interface continued to hum with energy, maintaining the connection even as the entity's direct presence faded. "Though I think symbiotic research partnership might be more accurate." He could still sense the entity's consciousness at the edges of his perception, not intrusive, but present, like knowing a friend waited in another room. The interface would allow controlled communication and exchange of information, filtered through systems designed to translate between incompatible realities. "What now?" Eliza asked, looking at the glowing technological array that pulsed with energies no conventional instrument could fully measure. Kellen touched the neural interface at his temple, feeling the integrated knowledge of 3 lifetimes flowing through his consciousness. Now we begin the real work, translating what we learn into forms humanity can understand and use. He thought of Lysandra, who had sacrificed everything to preserve her civilization's knowledge, of Eleanor, who had continued the pattern despite the doubts of her rational mind. Their legacy lived in him, not just their knowledge, but their courage to face the unknown. This isn't an ending, he said softly. It's a beginning. IV. The continuation. 2155 CE. 3 years after the convergence, Kellen stood in his private laboratory, watching as the interface matrix processed another transmission from the entity, referred to in their published papers as the correspondent. The former factory had been transformed into a research facility funded by a special division of Neurosynth, dedicated to what the company called advanced transdimensional physics. Only Kellen, Eliza, and a small team of carefully selected researchers knew the full truth. Translation complete, announced the system in its neutral voice. On the main display, complex equations and conceptual frameworks appeared, the latest exchange in an ongoing dialogue that had revolutionized theoretical physics. Eliza entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Now the facility's research director, she had embraced the extraordinary path their lives had taken with characteristic adaptability. The energy conversion model checks out, she said, handing him a cup. Preliminary tests show 93% efficiency, almost double our previous best. Kellen nodded, studying the display. The correspondent's perspective on energetic relationships continues to challenge our fundamental assumptions. What looks like waste to us is just energy expressing in dimensions we hadn't accounted for. Beyond the immediate applications, clean energy generation, advanced materials science, revolutionary approaches to medicine, the communications contain profound implications for humanity's understanding of consciousness itself. The entity experienced reality as a unified field where energy, matter, and thought were expressions of the same underlying patterns. The board is pressuring for more immediate applications, Eliza noted. They're having trouble understanding why we're focusing on consciousness studies when the energy technology alone could transform global markets. Short-term thinking, Kellen replied with a wry smile. Some things never change across millennia. He touched the neural interface at his temple, now a more refined version than the prototype he'd originally developed. Through it, he maintained his personal connection to the correspondent, a link that went beyond the technological interface the facility used for formal exchanges. In quiet moments, he sometimes perceived echoes of Lysandra and Eleanor, not as distinct personalities, but as perspectives integrated into his consciousness. Their knowledge had become inseparable from his own, though he maintained awareness of its origins. I've been thinking about the imprinting process, he said, turning to Eliza. The transmission of knowledge through bloodlines. She raised an eyebrow. You're not planning to have children just to continue the tradition? Not exactly. But the principle is sound, distributing knowledge across generations, allowing each recipient to add their unique perspective before passing it forward. He gestured to the neural interfaces they had refined, now smaller, more efficient, and capable of selective consciousness sharing without total immersion. We've created a technological version of what Lysandra achieved through metaphysics. Direct transmission of experience and understanding, beyond what language can convey. You're talking about expanding access to the correspondent's knowledge, Eliza said, immediately grasping his intent. Beyond just our research team. Carefully, gradually, Kellen clarified. With appropriate safeguards. But yes, a distributed network of understanding, not dependent on any single individual or bloodline. He brought up a new display showing a global map with potential nodes highlighted, research centers, universities, even remote communities with traditions of metaphysical study that paralleled Illyrian practices. Lysandra preserved knowledge by concentrating it within a single lineage because that was her only option. We can honor her intent while adapting her methods to our reality. Eliza considered the proposal, her scientific mind analyzing implications. A network rather than a chain, resilient through distribution rather than succession. Exactly. Kellen switched to another display showing the interface's underlying structure, a synthesis of symbolic patterns derived from Lysandra's traditions and cutting-edge technological frameworks. The interface itself embodies this principle, neither purely ancient nor purely modern, but an integration of both. Beyond the laboratory windows, the sun was setting over the city, a metropolis of gleaming towers and ancient foundations. Much like the knowledge they now shepherded, humanity stood at a threshold, preparing to integrate understanding from beyond conventional reality into its development. The process would be gradual, measured in decades rather than years. Some applications, clean energy, medical breakthroughs, new materials, would emerge relatively quickly. Others, particularly those related to consciousness and dimensional perception, would require careful introduction over generations. We need to document everything, Eliza said, practical as always. Create records that will survive technological changes, political upheavals, whatever comes. Kellen nodded, thinking of the brass bowl Lysandra had used, the journal Eleanor had kept, the neural interface he had developed. Different tools for the same essential purpose, preservation and transmission of knowledge across time. Already working on it, he replied. Multiple formats, distributed repositories, and something more. He led her to a secured room at the facilities center, where a crystalline structure pulsed with soft light, a physical-digital hybrid storage system that embodied principles from both human technology and the correspondence dimensional frameworks. This will survive virtually anything, he explained. And it contains everything, Lysandra's knowledge, Eleanor's discoveries, our research, and selected communications from the correspondent. A complete record of the journey from ancient Illyrium to the present. Eliza studied the structure with professional appreciation, ensuring the cycle continues even if we don't. The cycle evolves, Kellen corrected gently. Lysandra never intended rigid preservation, she wanted adaptive continuation, each generation adding its unique perspective before passing the knowledge forward. He felt a momentary resonance through the neural interface, a sense of approval that seemed to come from across millennia, not Lysandra's conscious thought, but the echo of her intent harmonizing with its fulfillment. The correspondent's presence brushed against his awareness as well, a vast consciousness observing with patient interest as humanity began to expand its perceptual boundaries. Not guiding, not controlling, but participating in an exchange that would gradually transform both parties. What do you think they would make of all this? Eliza asked, gesturing to their surroundings, the advanced laboratory, the interface technology, the gathered knowledge from across dimensions. Lysandra and Eleanor. Kellen considered the question, touching the silver streaks that had appeared in his dark hair over the past 3 years, a physical manifestation of his connection to the veil, just as it had been for Lysandra. I think they would recognize it as neither ending nor beginning, he said finally. Just one more transformation in an ongoing process. The pattern continues, but never repeats exactly. Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, ancient light reaching the present after traveling across vast distances. Within the facility, new understanding from across dimensional boundaries flowed through the interface, illuminating possibilities previously unimagined. The cycle Lysandra had initiated continued, transformed by each generation that carried it forward. Not preservation for its own sake, but evolution, knowledge adapting to new contexts while maintaining its essential patterns. Kellen activated the personal connection through his neural interface, sending a thought into the dimensional current that flowed between past and future, between worlds and possibilities. The pattern holds. The cycle continues. What was begun is fulfilled, yet never truly finished. From across the gulf of time and dimension, he sensed an answering resonance, acknowledgement and affirmation flowing back along the silver threads that connected all consciousness. The inheritance had become a legacy, and the legacy a foundation. What would build upon it remained to be seen, unfolding across futures yet unimagined. End. This document created by Kenneth Pipe Michael. Please report any violations of the terms of use including copyright and other violations to support@buglelabs.com.